Chapter 28. I froze, but only for a second, then I moved. I jumped up and started off toward the front door, running quiet and doubled over so I wouldn't distract Salvador or his audience. I heard shuffling and glanced back and saw Val following right behind me, and I was glad. I'd only known her for like 12 hours, but I could already tell she was the kind of person you wanted on your team. We made it through the auditorium doors at about the same time that the guard managed to open the front doors and come striding in. I stepped forward to meet him, and Val, real smart, stopped to close the auditorium doors behind us, blocking us off from that beautiful music. "What are you doing here?" the guard demanded, walking toward us, his voice loud and suspicious. "Shh," I said. "Quiet." Now, all I was trying to do was make the fella hush a bit so he didn't interrupt the magic happening back in the auditorium. But I said it harsh and kind of bossy, and I'll tell you what, even though it wasn't exactly a plan, that bossiness really kind of got us up on the right foot. Because that fella, he hushed. His mouth snapped shut and his eyes opened wider. He was young, all pale and smooth cheeked, maybe 20 or 21. We were not dealing with some hard as nails grizzled police detective. Val, she figured out the score pretty quick. She came up beside me just as he repeated quieter and more polite, "What are you doing in here?" And she answered back lightning quick, "What are you doing in here?" The guard blinked. I'm. "You're interrupting is what you're doing," Val interrupted. She jerked a thumb back over her shoulder. "We've got an important audition going on right now." The guard licked his lips and his face screwed up in confusion. "What kind of audition?" "There's nothing on the schedule and nobody told me there'd be an important audition." "I thought I said that the first time. My brother is auditioning to go to the Juilliard School in New York City. The judge flew all the way out here to meet him." The guard gulped. He looked desperately at me and then back at Val. I'll give it to him, though. He was clearly out of his league with Val, but he didn't give up that easy. Do you have permission to be here?" "Do you think we'd be here if we didn't have permission?" "So you're saying this is like cleared and everything, but yeah, obviously it was cleared by the director." Now, I knew that Val was blowing a lot of smoke and taking a shot in the dark, but it didn't show one bit. Her voice was calm and confident and downright mean. She didn't make it seem like she was about to get in trouble. She made it seem like he was about to get in trouble. It was awesome. Still, it was a risky move. My armpits prickled hot and my mouth went dry. The dude squinted dubiously at Val. Then he spoke. "Mrs. Marshall cleared this. She gave the okay?" Yeah. She's in there right now," Val said, jerking her head toward the closed doors behind us. "You can hang out and talk to her after the audition if you want, but I wouldn't interrupt right now if I were you. You know how she can be." It was another risk, another shot in the dark, but the dude nodded. "Oh yeah, I sure do," he murmured. Val was shooting into the dark left and right, but she was hitting the target every time. Then just like that, Val went nice. "Listen," she said, her voice softening and sweetening. "I'm sorry they didn't let you know about this. It was kind of last minute, but please don't mess this up for him. It's his one chance." The guard's whole body eased up. He took a couple calming breaths and wiped at his forehead real quick. He was so visibly relieved that he was now somehow mysteriously on Val's good side. I almost smiled. "So that's your bus parked out back then?" he asked. Val blinked. "Of course," she said after a second. "We're from the Montana Music Conservatory. It's a private school, very prestigious." "Y'all are students from a school?" he asked somewhat doubtfully. His eyes went from Val's nose ring to my scuzzy cargo shorts and bare feet. Val just laughed, a big, easy head-back laugh. She even reached out and shoved the guard's shoulder playfully. "Yeah, who else drives around in a school bus?" The dude sniffed and his eyebrows flickered up. He smiled, then laughed along with Val and shook his head. "Yeah, yeah," he chuckled. "Well, that's true." I kind of wanted to jump in and suggest that, in fact, there might be any number of interesting, trustworthy people besides students who drive around in school buses, but I figured it wasn't the time or the place for that point to be made. All right, well, I'm sorry I barged in like that, he said. You were just doing your job, Val reassured him, holding up her hands, smiling wide. The guard backed up to the front door and opened it behind him. I hope your brother makes it, he said, smiling at Val. Oh, thank you, she said. But then the guard stopped halfway out the door, his eyebrows scrunched down. But if the audition is so important, why is he dressed like that? I saw him. He's wearing jeans and an old... Excuse me? Val shot in, and her voice was right back to acid and flames and sharp knives. The guard's eyes went wide again. I just mean he's wearing... Excuse me? Val repeated, her voice rising and adding a few more degrees of nasty. Well, excuse me. She took a step toward him, her hands in fists and her head tilted to the side like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I know I couldn't. The guard gulped. Nothing, just have a good day, sorry. And then he was out, and the door closed behind him, and he stood there for a second, blinking at Val. And then he turned and got out of there double quick. We watched him go, hustling back toward his security car. Hey, Val, I said out of the side of my mouth. Yeah? I think you should seriously reconsider giving up on that acting dream of yours. She snorted. Thanks. That was amazing, especially at the end. I think he would have given you his keys if you'd asked. Val grinned at me. That excuse me trick is like magic. It works like 75% of the time. If you say excuse me all mean and rude and then just keep saying it louder, people will just, surrender. I'm going to remember that one. Out the window, the guard was still sitting in his car. He hadn't pulled away yet. You know, I said, he might still put it all together. Yeah, we should beat it. Yeah. Me and Val walked in just as Salvador played out the last ringing note. The front row audience jumped to their feet in a standing ovation. Salvador, up there in his blue jeans and old tank top, took a deep bow. Ms. Vega was wiping tears from her cheeks. So was Concepcion. I made eye contact with Lester, who was clapping from behind the glass at the booth at the back of the auditorium, a huge smile on his face. I shot him a "we got a semi-serious situation here" eyes and motioned for him to come on, and he did. Val and I hurried the crowd out the back as fast as we could without freaking anybody out or ruining the good times vibe. Salvador was practically glowing. He and his mom were the last to leave. She ran up to him on stage, and they stood there in the spotlight in a long, tight hug as everyone else filed quietly past them and out the back door. There's so much happiness in the world. As we rolled out the parking lot, we were all quiet. I think we still all had Salvador's music echoing in our hearts and didn't want to let it go just yet. I was settling into my seat, Ivan on my lap, and a book in my hand when Salvador turned from where he was sitting with his mom in the seat in the front of me. He looked into my face with those serious eyes of his and said, "Thank you," all quiet and solemn, and I said, "It was no big deal." And he shook his head and said, "Yeah, it was." And I said, "Salvador, you are really good." And he shrugged, all modest, but then smirked and said, "Well, yeah, of course." And we both smiled, and then he added, "We are definitely getting you home in time, Coyote Sunrise." And then he turned back around, and that was that. It was a nice moment, it really was. Everything at that moment was going so well. Of course, it all fell apart. Everything does if you give it long enough. Secrets especially.